The discussion today, I hope, is an interesting one. We're certainly going to have time afterwards for you to ask questions of our panel. This is one of the most difficult, intractable and challenging problems of not only this society, but of societies all around the world. I was reading the Sunday or the weekend Australian magazine, and Philip Adams, who has been writing columns there for the last 30 or 40 years, just had a very timely one, and it's headed, "Drug Wars, Just Say No." And as he says, you know, it's not quite that simple. And in his few words in this column where he says he gave up smoking when he was 30, he's now in his 80s, he said he kept away from drugs because they made him feel that he'd lose control. And he liked to be in control of life. So would most of us, I think, but most of us are probably addicted to something along the way. But he did say, and he did make the observation, that people in every culture and time have eaten odd plants or munched magical mushrooms in order to enhance their pleasure or dull their pain. And that's probably true in the sense that historically every culture has had some form of mood-altering material. I remember in the 60s when I was, well, I was only 1 or 2 in the 60s, but there were lots of organic ingestibles that were floating around, and people were looking at Mexico at special plants to heighten their experiences, and LSD was being touted by Timothy Leary, if those of us who remember, and of course they were the major time when drugs had really become, or illicit drugs become a major issue following the Vietnam War, and we've been seeing the legacy of that for a very long time, and certainly clear that our response to that has been an abysmal failure. We'll get to that later on. So what I thought we'd do is we'd start with Robert, who is at the front end of the war on drugs, in the sense that he's one of the, you know, I won't say the casualties, but certainly we've had the law enforcers along the way. But I thought, Robert, you're in the middle of this war.
That's right.
How long have you been serving in this war?
Yeah.
I think you've got it. Yep.
That's true.
Would that help also? Yep. I suppose, well, I'm 45 years of age now. Look, I started, I suppose, my path to drug use from very early, simple ways. I started stealing cigarettes from my dad's packet at the age of about 12. You know, smoking cigarettes at 13. Throughout my teen years, I was doing the regular things that most teenagers do, a bit of binge drinking on the weekends and a bit of fun here and there. And I've been smoking marijuana since the age of 13 also. Probably about when I hit my early 20s, I started, you know, trying other things, the party drugs, the ecstasy, the amphetamines, and also working in hospitality as a chef. The industry is flooded with all that sort of thing.
Tony Bourdain, you could have ended up with a TV show. Yeah.
So, but I didn't actually, heroin was the one that really got me. I didn't try that till I was about 26 years old, I think. And like most people, when I started using it, I didn't think it would, you know, take control of me. I thought I was stronger than that.
What was so attractive, even at a very young age, what was so attractive to you? Why did you feel the need to start with the cigarettes and move on?
I suppose the cigarettes was more or less the peer thing too, and curiosity.
Right.
And like everything else, as I sort of graduated through the ranks of the drug use, just curiosity and stupidity got the better of me. All the other substances I didn't really think I had a problem with. There was no real signs of addiction there.
Did you ever feel you could just say no?
Yes, to most things, but the heroin, I could for the first couple of months, but no, not at all. Once that took hold, it really got me.
And that led you into illegal activities?
Yeah, well, I suppose it was mainly crimes of dishonesty, a lot of stealing. To fund the habit, yeah. So, but I was using amphetamines at the same time too. I was basically using speed or ice to keep awake, to get the confidence to go out to commit the crime to fund the heroin habit. So it was a bit of a cycle there.
So when did it go terribly wrong?
As my marriage deteriorated, when was that? That was probably about 12 years ago. Yeah, once that started failing, and my partner didn't even know I had a habit for about 4 years. I kept it quiet from her. And
so you managed to function pretty well in society?
Quite normally, yep. I held down the job, but then also I was committing some crimes on top of that job because we were paying a mortgage. I was living the illusion, really, of normality. I wasn't being caught, no.
So much for our criminal justice.
Yep. Eventually I did.
Got him
quite a few times, yep. I served
in the end, yeah.
I served jail 4 times, relatively short sentences, of about 12 months, 4 months, 13 months. And I didn't really learn my lesson there either. I have to say jail was too easy, and it wasn't really punishment.
But you weren't getting any treatment in jail?
No, treatment was hard to obtain in jail. Say for instance, once you're sentenced, you'd arrive at the assessment prison in the city. You'd be there only for a few weeks. From there, you'd go to your remand jail while you're awaiting sentencing. And you'd just be transferred from jail to jail. So even for medical attention or anything at all, by the time the process gets happening, you're moved along to the next jail.
So I read the Herald Sun assiduously because I'm a masochist, but they keep telling us that, jail it should be a deterrent. Clearly, you weren't reading the Herald Sun.
Not at all, no. I don't read tabloid magazines.
So you were there, you said 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
So it was a holiday camp?
I wouldn't say it's a holiday camp, but I didn't really use in jail. The availability of drugs in jail is, there's quite a
Better
bit.
than outside?
The quality's actually better inside. The cost isn't, the cost is more.
Yeah.
But as far as punishment goes, I mean, yeah, you are deprived of your liberty. That's probably the worst thing, but
They didn't put you off, that's the point.
it didn't put me off at all. It was quite easy. As you read and as you see in the media, when you have access to a lot of things in the jails. You can get your PlayStations, you can get your computers. You have $140 a month you can spend on a canteen where you can buy all your treats and your goodies. And depending which jail you're at, if you're at a regional jail like Fulham Prison, you have Ozstar on your TV. You've got digital flat screen TV in your cell. And when you're living a bit of when the addiction was at its full.
But you're currently under a drug treatment order.
Yeah, I'm about 11 months into the order. I'm not far off finishing. I suppose that was the only thing I didn't try. I'd been on credit bail programs. I'd been on CCOs, paroles.
And you failed on each time?
I've failed on every one. Yes, yeah. I was able to reoffend, continue to use, and I wasn't held accountable for my actions whilst on these programs. I had a corrections officer who I'd see once a fortnight on my previous order, and I'd attend there fortnightly. He'd ask, "How you going, Rob?" I'm still squatting. Any drug use this fortnight? Yes, I've had this, and this. Oh, that's great. We don't have to screen you then. Off you go. We'll see you next fortnight. So off I went.
They were okay drugs, weren't they?
Yeah.
Or he was just too busy to want to get you?
Well, he actually told me he was specially appointed to me to look after me because the previous magistrate who had sentenced me thought there was no hope for me, and it was inevitable. I'll be back in jail. So his job was specifically to try to keep me out of jail.
So you graduated from some of those non-custodial orders into prison and then kept going back.
Yes.
So
Yep.
a bit of that revolving door that we hear about.
Yep.
Yeah.
But at this time, I was in jail for about 3 months. I was locked up again June last year, and I was given the offer of the drug treatment order, and I was released on October the 10th last year. And I chose the order. I could have done another 4 months or so in jail, with 7 months in total
Were
served.
you in the city or in Dandenong?
In the city, sorry.
Because there are only 2 drug courts in Victoria, the one that started in Dandenong and now more recently in the city of Melbourne. So,
Yep. And yeah, so I was given the option of doing those extra few months or undertaking a 2-year order. So I chose the 2-year order.
but it was easy in jail, so you knew what you were up for, weren't you? They did tell you, I mentioned the magistrate told you, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I knew what I was getting myself into,
Right.
but I was at that point in my life. I was ready to stop. I was totally over it. I knew a long time ago I was going nowhere. I was just going backwards, but I was in that rut and I just couldn't find my way out still.
And what were you using at that time? What were you up to?
At this time, it was predominantly heroin. There was occasional ice use and synthetic marijuana too.
Right. What about the ice? Because we read now, and I chair the Victorian Sentencing Advisory Council, and the recent work we've done just confirms that ice is a really major problem in our society, especially in terms of responsiveness to treatment, all the associated offending, a lot more violence involved and the like. So what was your experience with ice?
At the time, I thought I was doing great on it.
Yeah, made you feel really good.
Yeah, and I'd look at myself in the mirror and think there's nothing wrong here. But if you look at a photo of me, 12 to 14 months ago, I was a totally different picture.
Right.
I'd never been a violent person on any substance. I'd always believed I've been quite a happy-go-lucky. I enjoyed my drugs, or I like to think I enjoyed my drugs back then. But I suppose it lowered the inhibitions quite a lot, and the care factor went out the window quite a bit on it. So
it was very disinhibiting.
Yeah, zero fear of consequence.
Right, but made you feel terrific.
It did, yep.
Okay, so you've got into the clutch, under the supervision of drug court magistrate, and I've warned you, it's hard and there's none of this, it's okay, no screening, no nothing else, you've got to appear. How's that altered both your own behaviour and your perception of the criminal justice system? Because you must have been pretty cynical, going into jail, out of jail, CCOs, parole, you'd bomb down on all of those. How have your views changed?
I've never had any problems with the justice system and the people who work within it.
Had problems with
yeah,
you?
yeah. The police officers, the magistrates. I've never felt no animosity towards them when I was apprehended or sentenced. I know they're just doing their job.
Right.
I knew I was the one in the wrong.
Right.
But the thing that I found different about this order was, as you said, it is quite intensive. Very intensive actually to begin with. And it pretty much takes up your whole day, your whole week. You wouldn't have time to reoffend if you wanted to.
Right.
But just the people themselves, everything from Mr. Parsons to the people who work under him. I don't know. I found it quite different. Everything from their understanding, their empathy, their willingness to put themselves in my shoes and sort of
Right.
have a look.
So you don't think, as it's often portrayed, just a soft option, that we're going soft on crime by having this touchy-feely, tree-hugging kind of order?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. No.
All right. Alyssa,
Yes, sorry.
you were involved in the original drug court, which was started in 2004
Yep.
in Dandenong. It was emulating some of the experiments that were going on in the United States back in the late 1980s, when judges there realised that prison, exactly as we've heard, was just a revolving door. They kept seeing the same people coming back again and again. And they realised what they were doing was effectively futile. And all they were doing in the end was just increasing the length of the sentence. It wasn't dealing with the underlying problems, wasn't dealing with addiction, wasn't dealing with family pathology, wasn't dealing with homelessness, wasn't dealing with unemployment. And so it took us a while to get the hang of it, and Alyssa was there as the first manager. What was the name?
Second in Victoria, but first in Tasmania. I was the program manager back then.
Program manager. So you're both a policy person, a practitioner, and now a clinician. So why can't he just say no? What's the problem? Is it just lack of self-will from these people? Just stubborn?
Well, I think the best thing about this panel, Ari, is that Robert's part of it, because my answer to that would be ask him.
I can say no now.
I think that there is what we do know, and in my experience in working in this area for a while now, is that for everybody it's different. For everybody there are different reasons that they come to drug use. for everybody there are different reasons that they can stop drug use at a recreational level, or that they go on to become addicted and it becomes something that's problematic in their lives. And then for everybody, again, for those people that get to that point, there is something, there's a click, a realisation, an idea, the light globe goes on, whatever it is, at whatever whatever point in somebody's life, and it's different for everybody, that they have the desire to stop, have the desire to not live the life that Robert was describing before. And that might be in the case of the drug court context, and Robert and I were discussing earlier, I hope you don't mind.
Well, no.
We were talking about, and in fact you alluded to it then, Robert, the way in which people come to the drug court is through the criminal justice system, normally because they've hit rock bottom, in particular in a criminal justice sense, because for those of you who are unaware, the drug court is only available to those people who are facing actual terms of imprisonment, which means that there's, you're not collecting $200 and you're not passing go. You're going directly to jail. But for the treatment options and monitoring and supervision options available through the mechanism of the drug court. And what that means for some people is that that's the trigger. It might be that for the first time there is somebody in a position of authority that says, I'm here to listen to you, and I believe in you, most importantly. And some people have never heard that before, and that might be the trigger. Or it might be that they have genuinely just never been offered the support before, wanted to get out, but not been able to have the capacity in the throes of everyday use to be able to have the clarity of thought to access the help, or even to know where to access it. The alcohol and other drug sector is, when you're working in it, when you're a client of it, some of the time, anecdotally as I've been told, and part of my practice is to ask quite a lot of questions, as Robert discovered earlier today. But it seems really easy to navigate from inside the system, and sometimes actually it doesn't seem easy to navigate. But when you're outside the system and when you're trying to navigate day to day, just trying to live day to day, it's an extraordinarily difficult sector to get into unless you know the right avenue and mechanism to do it. And the drug court in this instance, and for Robert, as we were talking about before, provided that inroad. So it might be that. For people that don't have access to the drug court or don't come to their light bulb moment or the right time, then it can be notoriously difficult, and sometimes it's family, and sometimes it's friends, and sometimes it's just sheer determination and will, and just I'm sick of the lifestyle. But there's not one size fits all, so it's difficult to answer the question with a, yep, this is the way, the light and the truth.
So when the drug court was set up and the drug treatment order that Robert's undergoing, unlike the traditional orders which were based on, well, if you blow it, you'll be prosecuted, you'll be sent back to jail, or you'll be sent to jail if you're on a community correction order, it was based on the model that addiction was a chronically relapsing condition. That is, it was built on the prediction of failure that people recognise. It was hard. So what do we know about addiction? Is it willpower? Is it chemical? Is it neurobiological? I mean, what do we know? Because we talk about gambling addiction, we talk about addiction to sport or the gym or something else. What do we know clinically about addiction? Is there such a thing?
As addiction?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, and this is one of those questions I was saying to, I was speaking to Ari before and saying that there'll be people in this audience that are much better versed to speak about addiction from a clinical perspective and from an evidence-based perspective than me. But what I know about addiction is that, again, it depends who you ask. Some people will tell you, as you say, Ari, there is a very strong school of thought that it is a chronically relapsing disease. So, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, etc., they certainly talk about the disease model of addiction, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, people in the audience that know things about this.
Just ignore them. I mean,
Right.
you're, up there, you're taller than them.
But for once, so the National Drug Institute in America would also speak about the disease model and about that it is a chemical and physiological response that in some people is stronger. Some people will have a stronger propensity towards addiction than others, based on the wiring in their brains and the chemical imbalances that drug use will create. Others, for example, we had Dr. Gabor Mate out here a couple of weeks ago, who is an addiction specialist, in his words, from Canada. And he will talk about it, addiction, rather than it being a disease, something that is more environmental in nature. So something that comes from wanting to ease a pain. And he talks also about all of us having pain and all of us wanting to alleviate it through whatever mechanism.
Is it also an addiction to pleasure?
Yeah, and in fact that's the other side of it. But in terms of how sustaining it is, that chase of pleasure, but also that pleasure to overcome the underlying pain. I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think.
Right. So going back to you had the whole smorgasbord. You had nicotine, heroin, a bit of ice.
Nicotine's still there.
Nicotine's still there.
We're working on that.
That's right, yeah. What are the challenges of operating or responding? Because I'm not a clinician. I understand, heroin we sort of can manage, and various other, we've got drugs or the like, but what are the different interventions with the different drugs?
I think, again, it depends on not only the drug, and actually not even particularly the drug, but the person. There are going to be different... So there are certainly strong evidence bases for things like cognitive behavioural therapy, for example, in terms of being able to respond to addiction on an individual and to a lesser extent group therapy level. There's also strong evidence for and growing evidence for peer-based models. Manella and I were talking about this earlier. There's also, but one of the biggest challenges that I've found, and certainly in trying to, when you have the opportunity to develop something like, for example, the Family Drug Treatment Court in the child protection sphere, which is a brand new program. We had a blank slate, blue skies.
Alyssa ran that one as well.
And trying
She's
to
been around a bit, yes.
Yes, but trying to be able to develop a suite of treatment options for people that are coming into that program, for example, from nothing. So we had a blank page in front of us. One of the most important things for me was to be able to recognise that it takes different strokes for different folks, and that we had to be very mindful that one size does not fit all. And I think that's one challenge, to be able to meet the needs of everybody, every individual that comes into the that has an interface with those programs. But the other thing that's a challenge is more of a mechanical one, more of an access one, and more of a funding structure one as well, I think, because certainly in the public system, for example, and we had there is a finite amount of treatment options available that are publicly funded, and also there's within those publicly funded treatment options there will be restrictions around the length, the longevity, and the type of treatment that you can access in that setting, which I think is extremely problematic for people who need it now. They've decided now this is the time. And then to add to that, finally, I mean, we had anecdotally, to provide you with an anecdote, this morning I came from a clinical review team meeting, the equivalent of in the service that I currently work in, and one of the people that came to present a case was talking about a gentleman who had, who currently drinks 5 litres of wine a day, and has just been told that he's been in and out of hospital, as you can imagine. He's just been told he has 6 months to live if he doesn't do something right now. And if he doesn't do, and even then, it might not look so good.
Does do something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The problem for him is that he has a history of, he's on the sex offenders register, which means that no one is taking him in. No public service will take him in, and he doesn't have $30,000 for the private sector. So the challenge of access in that case is also extraordinary. So there's challenges abounding, Ari.
Indeed. No lack of word. Greg,
Yes.
you're an ex-cop.
That's right. Like, do I stand and admit that?
No, well, you know,
My name's
we
Greg
know
Denham.
that, and we've now got
I'm an ex-cop.
we've got 3,000 more of you. So why hasn't our crime problem disappeared?
Our
There's
crime
so
problem
many
or
of
our
you.
drug problem?
Our drug crime problem with a slash between it, and because we know so much crime is driven by addiction, and surely our tough law and order approach should have, if it were done properly, with every, we've now got 7,900 people locked up in jail. Why hasn't that problem gone away? What's wrong with you police or ex-police?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of current police, but I was in policing for a long time, and I think over that time, and I won't tell you when I joined Victoria Police, but it was a long time ago, and I think the illicit drug market in particular has become so entrenched in our society and it's so profitable, and there are so many people prepared to get involved in the illicit drug market. And on the other side of it, there are people who choose to use illicit drugs, and I want to emphasise that the majority of people that use illicit drugs don't necessarily have a problem with their drug use. It's only a small number that have a, I guess, problematic drug use, whether it's addiction or chronic dependency, which leads to other types of problematic criminal behaviour. A lot of people use illicit drugs and use them relatively safely, and the drug that's used most often is cannabis. And if we locked up everybody that used cannabis, then at 7,900, there'd be hundreds of thousands of people in
fact,
prison.
we know from the studies of the sewerage system, I don't know whether you're aware of these really interesting subset of studies. One of my friends in Tasmania is one of the leaders of that, where they take samples of the outflows from the sewerage and then measure the proportion of drugs in there. And to wonder that anyone is not on drugs according to this sample.
That's right. If you're abstinent, you might be... in fact, if you are abstinent, you are quite unusual, because if you don't use any drugs at all, you are part of a very, very small group that don't use
And
drugs.
I don't flush.
And any type of drug.
That's my trick, yeah.
Look, but getting back to your question, it's a good question, because I think, if we have this belief that we are going to increase police numbers, increase penalties, sentencing, and make life really, really tough for people that use illicit drugs, given that many people use them for their benefits. Drugs are here for a reason. They're here because they provide a benefit for mankind.
Forever and a day,
That's right, exactly. Throughout history, drugs have been here because they provide benefits. So if we're going to say, okay, we'll allow you to use these drugs, but don't use those. Oh no, they're illicit because they're really dangerous. Not many people actually experience those really dangerous drugs, actually get a lot of harm out of them. But those that do, they're additionally burdened with the stigma and discrimination that comes with the criminalising of that drug use.
And it's
So
interesting, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt for a second, but we're now seeing this major public policy problem of the opioid addictions of the legal drugs, and that's shows up that rather strange divide between the legal and the illegal.
Well, it does, and for those people that, well, people overdose, we have 142 people a month die from overdose in Australia, recently released statistics, but 2/3 of those people who die have a history of illicit drug use as well, heroin use. So it's the prescribed drugs that are pushing many people over that threshold now.
So the line between the crims and the rest of us is pretty thin.
Are you talking about the people, which crims are we talking about? Because you're trying to put words in my mouth.
Of course.
I can tell.
That's what the police used to do. No.
Well, actually, it's not funny you should mention that because I'm standing under a bright light and it's really warm and I'm getting interrogated. So I kind of feel how it's being reversed now, that role. So, but yeah, look, I was in policing for a long time and I saw policing change. I saw the attitude of police change, but it ebbs and flows. It's a bit of a pendulum. You know, when I was working with Victoria Police, I saw a massive change in the late 80s, early 90s around drug harm minimisation. Mainly brought on because of the issue around HIV and its transmission through injecting drug use, so needle and syringe programs, increased access to opiate substitution programs, etc. And then in the late 90s, the pendulum swung back again with another political view of drugs through John Howard and the tough on drugs. And John Howard, you may not like his politics, but you've got to acknowledge his ability to seize the moment, seize the day, and he did. And he seized the day, and he brought the issue of policy around drugs right back into the law enforcement sector. And now, I think law enforcement gets something like 75–80% of all of the funding that goes towards dealing with drug issues in communities goes towards law enforcement.
And we're seeing that cycle now in the United States under Jeff Sessions. Again, that circle back to the law enforcement. So what made you see the light that the law enforcement policies, whatever they were, so you're now a recovering policeman or ex-policeman. What made you change to your current job? Perhaps you could describe what you do.
Well, I'm the executive officer for the Yarra Drug and Health Forum, and we, I guess we promote policy options based on what we experience in terms of particularly the illicit drug use in the city of Yarra. So we were very vocal around the implementation of the injecting room, which opened up a couple of months ago. And we see, I guess, issues on a day-to-day basis in Yarra, and it's probably the biggest street drug market that I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And people say, oh, you're exaggerating, but I've been very fortunate to travel to a lot of places in the world. And in terms of street drug markets, I haven't seen as big a street drug market as there is in North Richmond and Abbotsford. So we see every day people come from all over Melbourne to buy predominantly heroin and use on the street. And we see people, mostly the people that are chronically dependent, who have a range of issues in their lives which impact significantly on their lives in terms of homelessness, mental health issues, unemployment, you can sort of, the list goes on and on and on. So we say, okay, this is what we see on a day-to-day basis. We see, a pretty intensive sort of epicentre of drug use. But we also know those issues happen in other places as well. So we say, okay, how do we change policy to reduce the risks to the individuals and the broader community?
I hope, Greg, you're not going to say what we need is evidence-based policy to convince the politicians. You're not going to say that, are you? You're not going to say there's overwhelming evidence that treatment is good, that dealing with underlying problems is good, that a safe injecting room is a better policy approach, that law enforcement approach doesn't work and that we should try other. You're not going to tell us that, are you? That politicians will be influenced by evidence.
Well,
you're surely not going to make
Ari,
it in the face
if
of
I said yes or no, you could take it in another direction. But clearly I am, and clearly the issue is evidence does lead us in a policy direction. It doesn't necessarily get us over the line because we're advocating for an injecting room for over 10 years. And the evidence will only, the evidence is overwhelming. Burnett Institute did 2 very good research papers on the need for an injecting room.
Right. And if there's a change of government in November, the opposition has pledged to close it down.
Apparently, if there's a change of government, we will wait to see what happens. But evidence will only get you so far. You need to identify what issues or what barriers or what obstacles or what particular dilemma that evidence causes for people. It's a bit like you getting a cold call from an electric company saying, would you like to purchase our electricity, because if you do, our profits will go up. What they will say is, if I supply your energy, you're paying less. And you'll think, oh yeah, that's not a bad idea. They will then go on to say, okay, and we can do this, this and this for you. That's what we need to do. We need to say, this is the evidence, that will get their attention, and this is how we can make it work for you. Because if you're dealing with politicians, they see it from a different perspective. They will see it very differently. They'll say, oh, the evidence is quite clear, but I don't think the community's ready. I don't think, but how do we make the community
And they're
ready?
based on emotion. I mean, we've had
That's
the
right.
task force, hundreds of recommendations, where every task force still doesn't change it. I want to talk about evidence with Tony, because he's a man who's in the front line of the change in approach back from the 2000s, and you've lived through it, and now you're running the Melbourne Drug Court. So what's the evidence? I know that the dropout rate of the drug court, although there are lots of successes, a lot of people drop out, and there is a failure rate, and
Yeah,
you're
there
talking about it on the radio recently.
Sure.
How do we confront the fact that it's not an intractable problem, but it's certainly one that's challenging, isn't it? What's your experience of dealing with difficult people like Robert?
I wish they were all as difficult as Robert. That'd be an even more satisfying job. The drug court has a 40% success rate, broadly speaking. So that means 60% don't make it. They come out into the community, they're given the intensive treatment and support. They commit serious crimes when they're in the community, so they have to be locked up. We still have a duty to protect the community. Or they abscond and it's all too much for them, and I'll issue a warrant and get them back. And I'll give them a second chance, but not a third chance. If they turn their back on the program a second time, they're gone. And there's a third group, and this is the one that is of concern, and they're the people that are compliant but non-responsive. So they do everything we want them to do. They do supervised urine screens 3 times a week, and every week they see their corrections case manager and their clinical advisor and their counsellor, and they come and see me every week. And when I see good stuff, I reward them. When I see negative stuff, I sanction them, and that might mean putting them in jail for a week. They do everything. And 18 months down the track, because it's a 2-year order, we've got our hooks into them for a long time. 18 months down the track, the only thing that hasn't changed is their rate of drug use. And they're the group that we just don't have the tricks for. We don't have enough tools in the toolbox. The AOD sector, the alcohol and other drug sector, is learning every year, and we're picking up more skills and we're learning much more about addiction. But there's still a significant cohort of people that we just can't help, notwithstanding our best efforts and their best efforts. So there is that group. But it really is interesting listening to Greg to look at how we deal with illegal drugs. And it speaks to the evolution of drug courts, because drug courts evolve in societies where drug possession and use is illegal. And there have been examples in history where the drugs aren't illegal. And Greg will tell you about the evidence that suggests that maybe the drugs are a problem, or maybe it's the illegal status of the drugs that's the problem. Now, I'm a judicial officer, I'm a magistrate. I'm paid not to get involved in politics. There's this principle of the separation of powers, and politicians shouldn't tell the courts how to run their business, because courts often have to make decisions about government departments and politicians, and magistrates and judges shouldn't tell Parliament how to run their business. So that's not a question for me.
But you will be leading the next organised tour on a beautiful boat on the scenic cruise to Portugal.
Well, it's a good, lovely climate, and the wine is good, and the people are lovely.
What about their drug policy?
Well, it's been remarkable. They've taken a totally different shift. I'm not a student of it, but they've basically said that, as I understand it, Greg, it's not illegal to possess or use any drug. It is certainly illegal to traffic, and instead of spending all of that money, and it's you know, in Australia, if there's $1 available to deal with the drug problem, 80 cents of that dollar goes to the police enforcement agencies. Spend all of that money on treatment and support, and it's just turning the whole situation around as I see it. But maybe that's one that Greg would address if you put that
Well, we've
question to him.
seen the failure of sort of individual policy, we've seen the failure of law enforcement, we've seen only 2 drug courts. I mean, despite all the evidence, 40% is a better success rate than we get in the prisons. It took, if you took between 1989, when the first drug court opened in Dade County in Florida, to about 2002, when the first one opened in New South Wales, 2004 in Victoria, only last year or beginning of this year in Melbourne.
Last year, yeah.
We still only have 2. Now, when you look at the size of the drug problem, drug-related crime, and we would be covering maybe a couple of hundred offenders under...
We're funded to support 240 of the state's most serious drug offenders.
And when we look at the rate of crime, you can see this is a fairly narrow and heroic approach to the overall drug problem. So you're not required to answer this question, I'll put it to you anyway. So you're saying that the paradigm is wrong. You found that the paradigm was wrong. You found your life paradigm was wrong. What about the overall geopolitical, jurisprudential, law enforcement paradigm is basically wrong? That is, we are spending billions. That's not a understatement.
No.
We've built new prisons, 3,000 more police on top of the ones we've got now, still finding the same problems. Is the paradigm basically wrong?
Well, you know, all I can do is talk about the evidence and people can make their own minds up, but we know that if you grab someone who's got a small drug problem or is in possession and using a little bit of dope and you throw them into the criminal justice system, you will teach them how to become accomplished crooks. It's just the way it is when you stick young, naive people in a waiting room with hardened crooks waiting to see their corrections officer. So you've really got to question, and Vic Police are doing this now, you've really got to question the way we've approached this problem in the community. There's a number of police stations around the metropolitan Melbourne now who will at first choice divert young people away when they're picked up in possession or using drugs. Get them out of the criminal justice system. Sure, send them off to an episode of counselling at a place like Moreland Hall or Turning Point, but get them out of the criminal justice system because it seems that all we're doing there is making the problem worse. But it takes political courage, 10 years to get a medically supervised injecting facility when there's been one in King's Cross working for 15 years where there's been nearly 2 million injecting events and not one death. You know, it creates real problems and there needs to be political
It's
solution.
not that we haven't tried. We've had the credit bail system and we've had the bail support system. Generally, we've got a whole range of non-criminal justice interventions, and most people, I imagine, will have had some contact with a non-criminal justice system intervention along the way, which hasn't been effective. So it's not as if the criminal justice system and the police are the first port of call. But there is a major resistance to that kind of approach in terms of the what we know is most effective. In Queensland, I did some work there recently, the previous Campbell-Newman government abolished the drug court and the Koori court and a whole lot of interventions because they were soft on crime. Unfortunately, they were rejected after one term and a new drug court has now been established.
Yeah.
Building on the Victorian model, we've got drug courts, variations of that in every jurisdiction. But they are a very focused intervention. After all these years, are you still optimistic about the drug court model?
Oh, the drug court will expand, there's no question. I mean, just on a financial basis, you know, the program at Dandenong, which costs $3.2 million a year to run, so it's not a cheap program, actually saves the corrections system 14,000 prison bed days per annum, saves the jail system $3.8 million per annum. Now that's a profit to the taxpayer of $600,000, about 18%. The drug court is doing better than the superannuation industry funds. If you've got any spare cash, invest in drug courts. It's the way to sort your retirement. But if you look at the political issues, have a look at the other side of the coin. You know, the elephant in the room here is alcohol. Heroin, cannabis, ice, whatever you want to call it, the level of the problem and the amount of harm that it causes down here. Look at alcohol, it goes through the roof. You know, over half the people in jail for violent crimes committed it in an environment of alcohol intoxication.
Family violence issues.
Family violence. Half the sex offenders who are in jail, alcohol was a key part of their offending. And you try and get some rational discussion around alcohol policy. You know, you switch the TV on and there's the basketballers coming out and rolling out the next keg of freshly brewed beer. I mean, try to tell the politicians to do something about that. It's just, you know, it's the two ends of political irrationality. The prohibition on one side and the total protection of the alcohol industry, and still substantial protection for the tobacco industry. What a drug tobacco is. You know, it stinks, it's expensive, it's highly addicted, you don't even get stoned.
And it kills,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah, and it kills, yeah. I mean,
All right, on that optimistic note, talking about the military alcoholic complex that we have, and that's just describing the politicians.